Ever since the invention of nuclear weapons, humanity has been teetering on the edge of self-destruction. We've come terrifyingly close to accidentally wiping ourselves out more times than you can imagine. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's a history of near misses, of nuclear bombs accidentally detonating, hydrogen bombs being lost, and of false alarms that almost triggered the end of the world. Let's journey back to one of those chilling moments. It's January 17, 1966. A massive B-52 bomber is soaring over the coast of Spain. Tucked inside its belly are 4 hydrogen bombs. To give you some perspective, each one of these bombs is 75 times more powerful than the one that leveled Hiroshima. Now, this might sound absolutely insane, but back in the mid-1960s, at the peak of the Cold War, this was just another Tuesday. This mission was part of Operation Chrome Dome, a chillingly routine military operation. American bombers, loaded with city-destroying weapons, flew constant patrols along the borders of the Soviet Union. The logic was simple. If the USSR launched a surprise attack, these bombers would already be in the air, ready to unleash a devastating counterstrike within hours. The flight plan for this particular B-52 started in North Carolina. It was a marathon, a 24-hour-plus journey across the Atlantic, skirting the Soviet bloc, and then heading back home. A flight this long required not 1 but 2 mid-air refuelings. But for these seasoned crews, long flights and tricky aerial refuelings were all in a day's work. The first top-up over the Atlantic went off without a hitch. After making their turn back from the edge of Soviet airspace, it was time for the second refueling. At 10:30 in the morning, high above the small Spanish fishing village of Palomares, the KC-135 refueling tanker positioned itself in front of the B-52. Larry Messinger, the bomber's pilot, later recalled the moments leading up to the disaster. Said they were approaching the tanker just a little too fast. Normally, if a bomber gets into a dangerous position, the boom operator on the tanker yells, "Break away! Break away! Break away!" Over the radio, this is the signal for the bomber pilot to immediately cut power and drop to a safe distance. But that morning, there was no call. As the B-52 tried to adjust its position, something went terribly wrong. Suddenly, there was a massive explosion. The 2 colossal aircraft had collided. The tanker's refueling boom struck the B-52's fuselage, ripping off its left wing. The fireball was so immense that another B-52, flying nearly a mile away, witnessed the catastrophe. All 4 crew members on the tanker were killed instantly. On the B-52, 3 of the 7 men aboard also perished. The bomber broke apart in midair. Its deadly cargo, though, for hydrogen bombs, began their terrifying descent towards the Spanish countryside. Each of those bombs carried a payload of 1.1 megatons. Let me say that again, 1.1 megatons. That's enough power to erase a major city from the map. Now, to understand what happened next, you need to know a little bit about how a hydrogen bomb works. It's not 1 bomb, but 3 bombs in one. First, there's a conventional explosive. When that detonates, it triggers a smaller plutonium fission bomb like the one used on Nagasaki. This fission explosion creates the mind-boggling temperatures and pressures needed to kickstart the main event, the fusion reaction, where hydrogen isotopes are fused together, releasing an unimaginable amount of energy. As the bombs plummeted to Earth, the conventional explosives in 2 of them detonated on impact. Miraculously, this didn't trigger a full-scale nuclear explosion. Why? Because a nuclear detonation requires a perfectly symmetrical implosion to compress the plutonium core. Hitting the ground at random angles created an asymmetrical shockwave, which wasn't enough to set off the fission reaction. So, the fusion stage was never initiated. Palomares, Spain, and possibly a large part of Europe had been spared a nuclear nightmare. But the danger was far from over. While the nuclear chain reaction was avoided, the conventional explosions did exactly what they were designed to do inside the bomb. They pulverized the plutonium core. This blew highly radioactive plutonium dust all over the landscape, contaminating a 2.6 square kilometer area of the Spanish coastline with one of the most toxic substances known to man. The sleepy village of Palomares had just become the site of a major radiological disaster. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The U.S. military scrambled to the scene, launching a massive search and cleanup operation. 3 of the 4 bombs were located on land relatively quickly. The 4th bomb was missing. Eyewitness accounts from local fishermen suggested it had fallen into the Mediterranean Sea, and so began one of the most intense underwater searches in history. The U.S. Navy deployed a fleet of ships and deep-sea submersibles. For 80 agonizing days, they scoured the ocean floor. The missing bomb was a ticking public relations time bomb for the United States. The Spanish government was understandably furious. The incident exposed the incredible risks of the Chrome Dome program to the entire world. Finally, on April 7th, a small submarine named Alvin, the same sub that would later explore the Titanic, located the missing H-bomb at a depth of nearly 3,000 feet. The bomb was dented, but intact. It was carefully winched to the surface, bringing the terrifying episode to a close. The cleanup on land was a monumental task. The U.S. had to remove thousands of tons of contaminated soil and vegetation, shipping it all back to a nuclear waste facility in South Carolina. The U.S. government spent millions on the cleanup and on settling claims with the local residents. To prove the area was safe, the Spanish Minister of Information and the U.S. ambassador even went for a highly publicized swim in the sea near Palomares. But the story doesn't end there. Decades later, the radioactive legacy of the Palomares incident lingers. Studies have continued to monitor the area for residual plutonium contamination. In fact, as recently as 2015, the U.S. and Spain signed an agreement to finish the cleanup of the last remaining contaminated land. This single accident, a moment of human error during a routine flight, had consequences that have lasted for over half a century. And the most frightening part? The Palomares crash wasn't an isolated incident. There have been dozens of other broken arrow events, the military code for accidents involving nuclear weapons. We've dropped them, lost them, and even accidentally set them on fire. Each one of these moments was a roll of the dice with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. The story of Palomares is a stark reminder of how fragile our world is, and how close we've come, through our own mistakes, to the brink of annihilation. It makes you think, doesn't it? How many other close calls have we had that we don't even know about? It's a sobering thought. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this story as gripping as I did, make sure to hit that like button. And subscribe for more deep dives into history's most fascinating and frightening moments. From his ratchet wrench fell off. Ominous music, it fell 24 meters, hitting the fuel tank of the missile and puncturing a hole. The highly flammable rocket fuel began to leak into the silo. The missile complex and surrounding area were evacuated, but a number of military personnel remained on site to try to defuse the situation. The maintenance team had an indication of an engine fire and a rise in vapor concentration inside the silo. At 3 a.m., about 8.5 hours after the puncture of the fuel tank, the leaking fuel vapors ignited, resulting in an explosion. This explosion led to 1 death and 21 injuries. The 740-ton door keeping the silo sealed flew more than 60 meters into the air. It was recovered 200 meters away. The warhead containing the hydrogen bomb was also blown out of the silo, landing some 30 meters away. Luckily, it did not detonate, and these are just the near misses that we know about. Of the 32 broken arrow events listed by the Pentagon, one which occurred in the spring of 1968 remains classified. And there are likely many dozens more nuclear mistakes and near misses the public knows nothing about from every nation that has a nuclear arsenal. The worry of a nuclear mishap is not just the immediate damage done by a hydrogen bomb explosion. It's also the misunderstanding and retaliatory strikes that could arise. Imagine that in 1966, instead of hydrogen bombs falling off the coast of Spain, the plane crash occurred closer to the border with the Soviet Union. Humanity has been on the brink of nuclear war many times, and so far we've been lucky. The closest we've likely ever come was in October 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. Navy began dropping signaling charges into the water to bring a Soviet submarine to the surface. Tensions were high, and the submarine had not been in radio contact with Moscow for days. The captain of the submarine decided that war had broken out, and he was about to launch a nuclear torpedo. But the launch required the authorization of 3 men. 2 out of the 3 authorized the launch, but Vasily Arkhipov did not. A full-blown nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union was avoided by the rational decision of one person. The historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. later noted that this was not only the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, it was the most dangerous moment in human history. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, with the tensions between the US and USSR at an all-time high, both countries still conducted high-altitude nuclear tests. The US set off a 410-kiloton bomb, 50 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean, and a smaller 7-kiloton bomb at an altitude of 147 kilometers. 2 of the 300-kiloton tests conducted by the Soviets occurred in space. It's pretty hard to justify these actions. What if one of these tests was thought to be a nuclear first strike leading to a loud war? Because false alarms happened for something a lot more innocuous than nuclear tests in space. On the 26th of September, 1983, the Soviet satellite-based early warning system detected the launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, and their policy dictated that if any inbound missiles were detected, there was to be an immediate counterattack against the United States. This would have likely led to a loud war. The Soviet officer on duty at the time of the detection, Stanislav Petrov, was skeptical of the reading. He reasoned that if there was a genuine first strike, the US would launch hundreds of ICBMs simultaneously, not just one. The detection system then warned Petrov of another 4 missiles headed towards the USSR, but these 2 he dismissed as a glitch. Petrov was right. He made the right decision, and his clear thinking likely saved millions of lives. The warning system malfunctioned. It confused sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for ballistic missiles. Petrov took an early retirement and later suffered a nervous breakdown. Another close call happened on January 25, 1995, when scientists launched a rocket off the coast of Norway. Their rocket was there to study the northern lights, but Russian radar picked up this launch as it had a similar flight pattern and speed as the submarine-launched Trident ICBM. The incident was serious enough that a briefcase containing the nuclear launch codes was taken to the Russian president, Boris Yeltsin. I think most people believe the biggest threat posed by nuclear weapons is their deliberate use. There is this idea that as long as nations only have them and don't use them, they could act as a deterrent, keeping us safer. But all of these incidents demonstrate that the real risk of nuclear weapons is some freak accident. So far, humanity has been lucky, but how long until our luck runs out? But there's hope. In 1986, there were more than 70,000 nuclear weapons. In 2022, that number had dropped to 12,705, and more are being dismantled. But as long as there are any nuclear weapons remaining, the future of humanity is not safe. Electronic beeping. Hey, this part of the video is brought to you by Henson Shaving. Close shaves are bad when it comes to nuclear weapons, but they re-great when it comes to shaving. Henson is a company that was started by aerospace machinists who wanted to use their experience in precision manufacturing to create a better shaving experience. And honestly, I think they've succeeded. I've been using their AL13 for the past few months, and it's the best shave I've ever had. The razor is made using CNC machines with incredibly tight tolerances, so the blade sticks out just 3 millimeters. This means that the blade is perfectly supported, which reduces chatter, the up and down movement of the blade. This reduction in chatter reduces skin irritation. In fact, Henson conducted a test where participants shaved the left part of their face with a multi-blade razor and the right part with the AL13, and they saw a statistically significant reduction in skin irritation when the Henson razor was used. The AL13 is really high quality and it uses standard double-edged blades, which are much less expensive than the proprietary blades sold by other companies. So once you own a Henson razor, the cost of shaving works out to be just $3 to $5 per year, depending on how often you shave. And because you're not throwing away all that plastic, it's also much better for the environment. So if you'd like to have a better shaving experience while saving money and helping the environment, head on over to hensonshaving.com and enter code VERITASIUM for 100 free blades with the purchase of a razor. I want to thank Henson for sponsoring this part of the video, and I want to thank you for watching.